My twin sister wants everything I have, including my boyfriend. Growing up as a twin wasn't as idyllic as people imagined. Sharing everything with my sister, Ava, seemed like an endless battle for space, attention, and identity. From the very beginning, our dynamic had been defined by a subtle but persistent rivalry. Ava, the younger twin by just an hour, wore her entitlement like a badge of honor, while I, the elder by mere minutes, was constantly reminded of my duty to be patient, understanding, and generous. As children, our conflicts often started over the smallest things but quickly escalated into emotional battlegrounds. I still remember the way Ava would stretch herself across the entirety of our shared bed, leaving me clinging to the edge for dear life. When I complained, my parents' familiar refrain echoed in my ears. Let Ava have her way. She's younger. You're the older sister, you should know better. It wasn't just the bed. When our mother bought us matching dresses, Ava always insisted on taking the one I preferred. Even when it didn't suit her taste, she'd demand it with a stubbornness that brooked no argument. If I dared to protest, I was branded selfish or unkind. My parents' enabling words rang the same. Be a good sister, won't you? Ava needs this more than you do. As we grew older, these small grievances snowballed into something far more entrenched. Ava's behavior evolved from petty acts of selfishness to full-blown entitlement. She'd borrow my clothes without asking, monopolize conversations when we were out with friends, and make every effort to ensure she was the center of attention. On one occasion, she even went so far as to claim credit for a painting I had worked on tirelessly for weeks. My protests were dismissed as jealousy, and Ava basked in the undeserved praise. Still, there were moments when I saw glimpses of a different side to Ava, a side that reminded me we were bound by more than just sibling rivalry. Late at night, when the lights were off and the house was quiet, we'd whisper about our dreams and fears, sharing secrets that only twins could understand. These fleeting moments of vulnerability softened the edges of our relationship, creating a bond that, despite the tension, I couldn't imagine living without. But the push and pull of our connection was exhausting. It was as though Ava and I were locked in a perpetual dance, each trying to outshine the other while occasionally stepping on each other's toes. Every compliment directed at me felt like a slight to her, and every win she achieved felt like a personal loss to me. Our parents, though well-meaning, only deepened the divide with their constant reminders of my responsibility as the older sister. By the time we reached adulthood, the stakes of our rivalry had only grown. What had once been fights over toys and clothes transformed into battles for validation, respect, and independence. Ava's need to claim what was mine no longer felt like childish antics, it felt personal, deliberate. Yet, despite the endless clashes and hurt feelings, a complicated love remained. She was, after all, my twin, the one person who knew me better than anyone else, even if she often used that knowledge to her advantage. Looking back, our relationship was a paradox of closeness and competition. Ava had an uncanny ability to both infuriate and endear herself to me, a delicate balance that left me constantly teetering between resentment and affection. Though I longed for a bond unmarred by rivalry, I feared that without it, we might lose the spark that made our connection uniquely ours. For better or worse, Ava and I were two halves of the same whole, forever entwined in a complex and inescapable dance of love and contention. Meeting Alex felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. He was charming in a way that felt genuine, not rehearsed, with a warmth that drew people to him effortlessly. From the moment we met, he had a way of making me feel seen, as though I was the only person in the room. Our connection deepened quickly, and before long, he became a constant presence in my life. Someone I imagined a future with. Naturally, I wanted to share that joy with my family, especially Ava, my twin. Despite our differences, she had always been a significant part of my life. And her opinion, however grudgingly I admitted it, mattered to me. The day I brought Alex home, I was filled with nervous anticipation. My parents welcomed him warmly, and he settled into their company with ease, exchanging stories and laughter as though he had always been part of our family. But from the moment Ava walked into the room, something felt off. Her usual energy seemed amplified. Her laughter louder, her gaze lingering on Alex in a way that sent a flicker of unease through me. As the evening wore on, Ava's behavior grew more pointed. She monopolized Alex's attention, leaning in too closely during conversations, brushing her hand against his arm, and finding reasons to praise him at every turn. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. That her friendliness was just that, friendly. But as I watched her drape herself over his every word, a knot of jealousy and suspicion began to tighten in my chest. It wasn't just her actions that unsettled me. It was the way Alex responded. Though subtle, his smiles were a touch too amused, his laughter a little too eager. I wanted to believe it was all innocent, that Ava was simply being Ava, spirited and competitive, always needing to assert her presence. But the gnawing doubt was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just sibling rivalry anymore, it felt like a game with much higher stakes, and I wasn't sure I liked the way the pieces were moving. By the time Alex and I left that evening, the excitement I had felt about introducing him to my family had soured. I couldn't shake the image of Ava's two bright smiles and the way Alex's attention had wandered. What should have been a moment of celebration now felt like the beginning of something far more complicated, a storm brewing on the horizon that I wasn't prepared to face. As the weeks went by, Ava's behavior toward Alex became increasingly impossible to ignore. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. She was just being friendly, I thought. But her actions began to chip away at that fragile justification. Every time Alex was around, Ava seemed to transform into a version of herself that was louder, bolder, and far too focused on him. She laughed at his jokes, too much, too often. And always just a little too enthusiastically. Even when his humor wasn't at its best, her laughter rang out, drawing attention like a spotlight. It wasn't just the laughter, though. She had a way of positioning herself near him, brushing past him unnecessarily, her hand grazing his shoulder or arm under the pretense of casualness. Once, I caught her adjusting the collar of his shirt. An intimate gesture that felt like a deliberate overstep. Her comments, too, carried a sharp edge masked as flattery. She'd remark on how well-dressed Alex was or how lucky I was to have found someone so handsome and charming. Each word landed like a small thorn, making me question whether her compliments were genuine or aimed to provoke me. Alex, ever the gentleman, seemed unfazed, brushing off her comments with polite smiles. But I noticed his attention lingered a beat too long whenever Ava spoke, and that only deepened the pit in my stomach. Tension began to build in the air whenever the three of us were in the same room. Conversations felt like battlegrounds, Ava constantly interjecting, her energy dominating the space. I started dreading the moments when she'd be around Alex, unsure whether I was more upset with her boldness or his failure to set boundaries. What stung most was the realization that Ava wasn't just seeking attention, she was asserting dominance, subtly reminding me of the power she had always wielded in our dynamic. It felt like a familiar script, one I had grown up with but never imagined would extend to something as personal as my relationship. Watching her antics, I couldn't shake the growing fear that this wasn't just sibling rivalry. It was a calculated attempt to take someone, who mattered deeply to me. The unease that had been simmering inside me finally boiled over one afternoon. It started innocently enough. I was coming down the hallway when I heard hushed voices drifting from the living room. My steps slowed instinctively as I recognized Alex's low murmur, followed by Ava's familiar, lilting tone. They were talking, no, whispering, and their words were indistinct but carried an unmistakable intimacy. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe they were discussing a surprise for me, or something innocuous. But as I peeked around the corner, I caught a fleeting glance between them, a shared look that lingered a moment too long. My heart sank. That glance spoke volumes, a silent conversation I wasn't meant to be part of. It was as though they had built a world separate from mine, one I had no access to. I retreated, unwilling to confront them at that moment, but the suspicion gnawed at me. Later that week, my worst fears materialized. I had left work early, eager to surprise Alex with dinner. Only to find him and Ava seated together at a cafe near our neighborhood. They leaned in close, laughing over something I couldn't hear, their posture easy and familiar. My chest tightened as I watched from across the street. The scene unraveling like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. It wasn't just the setting or their closeness, it was the fact that neither of them had mentioned this meeting to me. My mind raced, piecing together every suspicious moment, every lingering glance, every too bright smile Ava had thrown Alex's way. The betrayal felt like a dagger to the heart. Sharp and unrelenting. As I turned and walked away, my hands shaking, one thought consumed me: this wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was real, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The people I trusted most had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The confrontation exploded one evening when I couldn't keep my suspicions bottled up any longer. Ava's coy smiles, Alex's guarded glances, and the weight of every stolen moment between them had finally pushed me over the edge. That night, with Alex conveniently absent, I cornered her in the kitchen. "You've done it this time, Ava," I said, my voice trembling with the effort to stay composed. "You couldn't just leave it alone, could you? You had to go after Alex." She raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about." Her nonchalance only fueled my rage. "Don't play dumb. I've seen the way you act around him, always laughing, touching him, making sure I notice. I caught you two together at the cafe. How do you explain that?" Ava crossed her arms, a sly smirk tugging at her lips. "Are you sure you're not just imagining things? Maybe Alex isn't as into you as you think." Her words were a slap in the face. "Of course you'd say that," I spat. "You've always wanted everything I have. When we were kids, you took my clothes, my toys, my spotlight. And now, my boyfriend. What's next, Ava? What more can you take?" "Don't be ridiculous," she shot back, her voice rising. "I didn't take Alex. If anything, he came to me. Maybe you should be asking yourself why he's looking elsewhere." Her words hit like a gut punch, but I wasn't about to back down. "Oh, so this is my fault now. I'm the problem. You're unbelievable." "No, what's unbelievable," she snapped, "is you always painting yourself as the victim. Poor you, always overshadowed by your selfish twin. Have you ever stopped to think that maybe I just got tired of being compared to you? Maybe I wanted something for myself for once." Her deflection was as infuriating as it was predictable. "Don't twist this around, Ava. You've spent your entire life taking from me, taking what's mine and acting like you're entitled to it. But this time, you've gone too far." Ava laughed bitterly, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Please. If Alex is interested in me, that's on him, not me. Maybe he's realized you're not as perfect as you like to think you are." The words stung more than I cared to admit. "You're unbelievable," I hissed. "Do you even care how this affects me? Or is it just about winning?" She scoffed, brushing past me as if the argument were beneath her. "Believe what you want. I'm not the one you should be angry with." I stood there, trembling, as she disappeared down the hall. Her words echoed in my mind, filling me with equal parts doubt and fury. Was she right? Had Alex been the one to initiate this betrayal? Or was this just another instance of Ava's insatiable need to take what wasn't hers? That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories of every petty rivalry, every time Ava had claimed something of mine, played on a loop in my head. But beneath the anger was an ache, a deep, gnawing sadness at the realization that the bond one thought we shared had been eroded by years of competition and resentment. I didn't just lose Alex. I had lost my sister, too. The tension that had simmered between Ava and me finally reached a boiling point. It was a late afternoon when everything came crashing down. Alex had just left after an awkward visit, and I could no longer hold back the resentment that had been building for weeks. I stormed into the living room where Ava sat, casually scrolling through her phone. Her air of indifference fueling my fury. "I can't do this anymore, Ava," I said, my voice shaking. "You've gone too far. You've crossed every line, and for what? To prove you can take what's mine." Ava looked up, her face a mix of irritation and amusement. "Oh, here we go again. The poor, victimized sister act. You're exhausted, you know that." Her dismissal felt like gasoline poured over an already raging fire. "This isn't just about Alex. This is about every single time you've made me feel like I don't matter. You've taken everything from me since we were kids, my toys, my clothes, my friends, and now my relationship. Do you even care about anyone but yourself?" Ava's eyes narrowed, her voice cutting. "You act like you're some saint, but you're just as petty as you claim I am. You can't stand that Alex might not want you anymore, so you're blaming me. Maybe you should take a hard look in the mirror." The words stung, but they only pushed me further. "You're unbelievable. You've always been selfish, Ava. And the worst part is, you think it's my job to forgive you every single time. Well, not this time. What's there to forgive? She shot back, standing up and closing the distance between us. You're the one who's insecure. If Alex was really yours, he wouldn't have even looked at me. My hand trembled with the urge to lash out. But before I could respond, the sound of footsteps interrupted us. Our mother, Helen, appeared in the doorway, her face a mixture of confusion and concern. What is going on here? She demanded. Ask Ava, I spat. She's been cozying up to Alex behind my back. Ava scoffed. Oh, please. She's just mad because she can't keep her boyfriend interested. Helen's face paled, her eyes darting between us. This is ridiculous. You're sisters. How could you let something like this tear you apart? It's not just Alex, I shouted, my voice cracking. It's everything. She's been undermining me my entire life, and you've let her get away with it. Helen's brows furrowed, her voice turning stern. You're both acting like children. This isn't how the family behaves. Our father, Thomas, entered the room then, his usual calm demeanor replaced with visible frustration. Enough, he said, his voice firm. You two need to sort this out, but not like this. But there was no sorting it out, not at that moment. Ava and I were too far gone, hurling years of pent-up grievances at each other like weapons. Every slight, every insult, every unresolved wound was laid bare. The room became a battlefield, and our parents were helpless bystanders caught in the crossfire. When the shouting finally subsided, the silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Ava, her face flushed with anger, and saw a reflection of my own pain staring back at me. For the first time, I wondered if she was as tired of this war as I was. But neither of us was ready to concede, not yet. That night, the house felt colder than ever. The walls that had once held our laughter now echoed with bitterness. I retreated to my room, my mind racing with everything that had been said. The wounds we had inflicted on each other felt deeper than ever, and I couldn't see a way to heal them. In the quiet of my thoughts, I realized something that shook me. This wasn't just about Ava or Alex. It was about years of unresolved hurt, the cracks in our family that had gone ignored for too long. And now, those cracks were threatening to tear us apart completely. The truth came to light in the most unexpected way. I had been scrolling through social media, aimlessly trying to distract myself from the chaos Ava and Alex had brought into my life. That's when I saw it, a tagged photo of Alex, arm draped casually around a woman I didn't recognize, his signature charming smile plastered across his face. My stomach churned. The caption read, "Date night with the sweetest guy." At first, I thought it was a misunderstanding, but as I delved deeper into her profile, more pictures emerged. Intimate dinners, weekend getaways, and candid moments that spoke volumes. It wasn't just one woman, either. A quick search of Alex's tagged posts unearthed a series of women who all seemed to believe they had something special with him. My heart pounded as the realization settled. Alex hadn't just betrayed me, he had been playing me and Ava, along with an unknown number of others. The shock gave way to fury. I decided I couldn't let him get away with this. When I confronted Alex later, his reaction was cold and calculated. He didn't even try to deny it, shrugging off my accusations with the kind of arrogance that had once seemed charming but now felt insidious. "You and Ava made it so easy," he said, his tone devoid of remorse. "Always competing with each other, always trying to outdo one another. I didn't even have to try." His words cut deep. But they also brought clarity. He had manipulated us, exploiting the fractures in my relationship with Ava for his own amusement. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a calculated attack on the very bond that should have been unshakable. I felt disgusted, not just with him, but with myself for letting it happen. As I walked away from Alex, a surge of determination replaced the anger. I knew what I had to do next. For once, this wasn't about him, or even Ava, it was about reclaiming the strength I'd lost and finding a way to move forward, free from his toxic influence. The moment I decided to tell Ava the truth about Alex was one of the most difficult choices I'd ever made. For years, we had been rivals in almost every aspect of life, constantly at odds, battling over everything from trivial possessions to deeper, unspoken grievances. But this time was different. This time, we were both victims. When I finally mustered the courage to confront her, the words came tumbling out in a breathless rush. I told her about the photos I had found. The women he had charmed and betrayed, and the cruel way he had manipulated us both for his own amusement. For the first time, Ava didn't argue or deflect. Instead, her face fell. Her usual confidence replaced with a quiet devastation. He said I was different, she whispered, more to herself than to me. I actually believed him. Seeing her like that softened something in me. For so long, I had painted her as my adversary, the selfish sister who always took what she wanted without thinking of the consequences. But in that moment, I realized we had both been pawns in Alex's twisted game. We can't let him get away with this, I said firmly, surprising even myself with the resolve in my voice. Ava looked at me, her eyes filling with a determination I hadn't seen before. For the first time, we weren't on opposite sides. We were united. The confrontation with Alex was nothing short of cathartic. We found him at the cafe where he had taken both of us on separate occasions. His smug demeanor faltering as we approached. Ava didn't hold back, calling out his lies and exposing his pattern of deceit for everyone around to hear. I stood beside her, my anger steady and sharp, reinforcing every accusation with the evidence I had uncovered. Alex tried to defend himself, but his usual charm fell flat. The weight of our combined fury was too much for him to handle. By the time we were done, his once flawless facade was shattered, and he slinked away, humiliated and defeated. As Ava and I walked out of the cafe together, a strange sense of relief washed over me. For the first time in years, I felt like we were on the same side, no longer divided by the petty rivalries of our past. Alex had tried to break us, but instead, he had inadvertently brought us closer. And that, I realized, was the best revenge of all. In the quiet aftermath of our confrontation with Alex, Ava and I found ourselves sitting together on the porch, the silence heavy but not uncomfortable. For the first time in years, there was no animosity between us, only the lingering weight of what had just unfolded. The shared betrayal had stripped away the usual pretense, leaving us with no choice but to face the truth, not just about Alex, but about ourselves. As the night deepened, I broke the silence. You know, I began hesitantly, I've spent so much of my life angry at you. Every argument, every fight, it's like we never knew how to be anything but rivals. Ava sighed, her gaze fixed on the distant streetlights. And I've spent so much of mine trying to keep up with you, she admitted. You've always been the one who had it all together. It felt like I was constantly trying to measure up, and when I couldn't, I'd take what I could just to feel equal. Her words hit harder than I expected. For so long, I had been consumed by my own grievances. Blinded to the insecurities that had fueled her actions. I didn't realize, I said softly. I always thought you just wanted to hurt me. Ava shook her head. It wasn't about hurting you. It was about not feeling like I was enough. The vulnerability in her voice disarmed me. In that moment, I saw not the scheming, selfish sister I had fought against for so long, but someone just as lost and flawed as I was. It wasn't easy to let go of years of resentment, but I realized I had a choice, to hold on to the past or to try and build something better. I think we've both made mistakes, I said finally. But maybe we can stop trying to one-up each other and just start over. Ava glanced at me, a tentative smile breaking through her usual guarded expression. I'd like that. We spent the rest of the evening talking, not about Alex, but about us. For the first time, it felt like we were truly listening to each other, laying the groundwork for a relationship built on understanding rather than competition. By the time the sun began to rise, the bitterness that had defined our bond for so long felt like a distant memory. As we shared a laugh over childhood memories, I realized this was the beginning of something new. For the first time, I saw Ava not as an adversary, but as a sister in the truest sense of the word. And for that, I was deeply grateful.